So very happy to have leading this discussion Dave Rapp. He is currently the Chief Content Officer and Senior VP at CQ Roll Call. He has a long history in this business, and he's really watched all of these changes take place in the newsroom because his history with CQ goes back all the way to 1985. He helped them really grow into the web, starting with their first web presence and then going to mobile and helping them reinvent a number of their publications. He then went on to run editorial at 1105 Government Information Group. Later he helped launch BGov, and now he is back at CQ Roll Call in this new position. He also, I will tell you, is a very recent former member of the National Press Foundation Board of Directors. So he's been a good friend to NPF and has helped us a lot through the years. So we're going to talk about digital in the newsroom.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Well, Linda doesn't realize because it was before she came here that I actually ran the Paul Miller program for 1 year.
I actually meant to mention
and so I know better than as well as anyone where the blood sugar level is in this group right now at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'll try to keep it short and sweet, or do some exercises in the middle of the thing. I don't know what. Davdi?
That's so weird.
I'm from the old country.
It's late in the day. It's a Monday sign.
So,
Wednesday.
I thought when Linda asked me to come talk to you guys, she mentioned 4 bullet points here: the immediacy imperative, aggregating content, what technical skills are needed in journalism now, and what's the reporter's job definition. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my career, as not that you care about my career, but as an illustration of how things have changed since I started in journalism. I'm a really old guy. First of all, you got to understand. I started as a reporter in high school for my hometown newspaper, the Evansville Press. Hired me as a junior in high school to cover Indiana high school basketball at night. It was a great job for a high school kid. A circulation of 100,000 newspaper. I mean, it was a real deal. But the thing about it is, besides the fact that we were still working in hot lead type back then. Anybody know what that is? That's it was an afternoon newspaper. There was 2 papers in Evansville, the Evansville Courier and the Evansville Press, and I worked for the Press. And I'd get sent to a game out in the boonies somewhere outside of Evansville to cover a high school basketball game. And there, sitting next to me, would be the guy from the morning newspaper, the Courier. And then each of us would, cover the game, take all our notes, go back to the office, and we actually had shared printing plant then in 2 different editorial offices. So he'd go over to his side of the building and write his story, and I'd be in my side of the building. There's no one in my office because it's an afternoon newspaper. No one works at night. And I have to say, it didn't take me long to figure out that people weren't going to read my story the next afternoon to find out what the score was. I had to come up with a whole different angle to the story than what he was going to do, which is so-and-so beat so-and-so. And so I ended up pacing the newsroom for, half an hour, just trying to come up with a lead that would be a feature, second-day lead type thing. It taught me how to be a writer, frankly. I'd really attribute that to my education and how to understand what the story is inside of an event that you're covering. My first job in newspapering, full-time job, was at, I'm going to name a lot of papers that no longer exist. This shows you how long old. The Memphis Press Scimitar in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, an afternoon newspaper, where we'd come in at 8:30 in the morning, and the city editor would greet us with a clip from the morning paper and go follow that up. Again, basically it puts a premium on enterprise, on entrepreneurial thinking, creative thinking. What's the reader going to want to know about this thing after they've already read about it or heard about it in the morning paper? I went on to the Cincinnati Post, again no longer in existence, but it's an afternoon paper, and did a lot of things. So I remember one study there was one story I still crystal clear in my mind. There was a guy by the name of Carl Cleve. He was an old automobile collector, and he collected these Lincoln Continentals out in his backyard, and it just drove his neighbors crazy. He had like 5 or 6 of these old rusty things. Turns out and he got arrested for not cleaning it up and got out of jail, and I was sent over to interview him. And while I was interviewing him in his backyard, up walks the reporter from the morning paper, and wants to do the same thing. And I just left. So I went around to the neighbors and started talking to them, got a really interesting point of view, and then came back after she'd gone, and the guy invited me inside for a cup of tea. And so I really got a kind of insight. Turns out he used to work at Los Alamos and was kind of a scientist that had gotten kind of unhinged, and he showed me this model. He was sitting on his fireplace mantle of this car that he called the Cleve. His name is Carl Cleve, the Cleve Colossus, and it was this huge, supersized Lincoln Continental type car that he wanted to design and thought was going to be the car of the future. And then I arranged for a photographer to come over and get a shot of him, and I left to go back to write my story, and the photographer comes back and said, was he in a tux when you interviewed him? He had gone and gotten dressed up for this photograph in a tuxedo. So I felt like I did not have anything to be embarrassed about the next day when I had a page 1 story on this guy, because it got all this color that the morning newspaper writer never got. I ended up at CQ following my wife. I was a trailing spouse. She got a job here in Washington first, and I landed at Congressional Quarterly covering the Farm Bill back then, which was a huge bill. It was a great bill to cover. I knew nothing about agriculture, but 85 was when all the Reagan babies who'd been elected to the Senate, along with Ronald Reagan in 1980, were up for re-election in 86. And most of them were from farm states and had no way of running on Ronald Reagan's farm bill, which was to get the government out of crop supports. And the Democrats knew this, so it really became a crucible for the whole control of the Senate, the farm bill, and it lasted a year long. But the point again was that I would go into a markup when they actually had markups, and several weeks of them, and sit around at a press table next to 2 wire service reporters, AP and Reuters at that time, and UPI. It was a UPI. The Reuters was a financial wire at that time, and another Knight Ridder Financial. Then a series of newspaper reporters from farm states, especially the big chains would always cover it. The Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal would show up every once in a while for a big event. Again, here I am working for the CQ Weekly Report. It comes out on Monday morning. It didn't take me long to figure out that people weren't going to wait till Monday to find out what the vote on the amendment was. That was the key thing there. So at the Weekly, we talked about ourselves as a daily newspaper that comes out once a week. We were still covering news, but again, it was important to come up with some kind of analytical spin that could either propel the story forward or give a political angle to it that most other reporters weren't covering. Again, that's why the control of the Senate was kind of the key thing in my mind. I ended up writing a book about it. How the U.S. got into agriculture and why it can't get out. It's still true. I became an editor for the Weekly and rose to assistant managing editor. And then at a point there in the mid-'90s, I was asked to take over our electronic publishing operations, which at that time was pre-web. We were a dial-up mainframe system to come in and get texts of bills and committee reports and some other things like that. But we were starting to do some original reporting based on the customer feedback. We were doing much more detailed committee votes coverage, writing synopses of every bill introduced and things like that. So it became an editorial operation and needed a journalist to run it. And so my boss put me in charge of it. And at that point, then, is when they wheeled in a personal computer to my office. First time anybody in our operation there had a personal computer. We used to work on these ATEX terminals. I don't know if everybody remembers ATEX. You remember, yeah. So anyway, they plugged it in and turned me on to put it on a web browser and said, "Here you go." And suddenly I was on the World Wide Web discovering hyperlinks and things like that. And again, there I realized there was a perfect application for Congressional Quarterly, in that all of our stories at the magazine, we had to include the bill number, a committee vote, or committee report if there was one, a vote breakdown. And we put these in little italic parentheses at the end of a paragraph. And I realized all of those little italic parentheses, which give you a page number of some previous edition of the weekly report or some vote in the back of the book, is the equivalent of a hotlink if you hotlinked it. So a user could just click on that, theoretically, and immediately get that piece of information they wanted to have. And so that's what we started doing. We basically built a website that became CQ.com at that time. Again, very personal, computer-oriented. Still very much what I would call a kind of a newspaper construct, which is the home page is like a front page, right? And the front page, every newspaper man knows, is what you spend all your time trying to figure out what's the top story, what's the second top story, what's the mix of stories you go on in there, and we were still creating home pages like that. Many of us still are, and I'll get to my larger point here. I'm not sure the home page is how our readers are interfacing with us, as we like to say now, or communicating with us, or consuming our content. Anyway, the point I wanted to make is at every stage of my career, whether it's for afternoon newspapers or a weekly magazine or a new website, the key thing was basically understanding who your audience is and where you are in their food chain. Because especially today, back in the old days, it was two newspapers competing. Now it's hundreds of sites. I was editor of Roll Call this past year, which was opened up as a free site for the first time. How many websites now are covering Washington news developments? I mean, everyone from not just The Hill and Politico and Roll Call, but BuzzFeed now has a Washington bureau. Talking Points Memo, Real Clear Politics, Huffington Post has a Washington bureau. I mean, a reader has dozens of choices in terms of how to follow what's going on in Washington. So how do I, as an editor of the Roll Call, which used to be the default paper 10 years ago in this town for covering these things, how do I compete in that world? So one of the first things we did was we went to a digital-first strategy. Instead of writing stuff for the paper and then putting everything in the paper online, we were writing for the web. And at the end of the day, we'd put the paper together based on what we'd put together that day. And really finding out that that's how most people were consuming our content, was through the web, especially staffers. Members of Congress, they still like the paper, a lot of them. But most staffers are reading us online. The other thing that's obviously going on is mobile, which is, again, how do you consume a home page, for instance, on a mobile device? It's really hard, but the way most people are getting stories now in this town, Twitter is the big way, right? Is a link. Essentially, you're basically reading links, or e-newsletter, which is a series of headlines, or Facebook, again, a series of headlines. So it's the critical skill there in getting someone to read your story isn't so much the lead of the story anymore as the first 4 words of the headline. Literally, the first 4 words have got to be enough to keep someone's attention to read the end of the headline, and then think about clicking on it to read the first paragraph of the story. And then just how do you keep them going? Because people are reading and consuming information a mile a minute. So anyway, that's kind of my thinking here in terms of the immediacy imperative. Obviously, has changed everything. Aggregating content. Talked about, one of the things we found out at Federal Computer Week, where I was working out there, is that people are reading everything, and your content may be as good as someone else's, or someone else's may be as good as yours, as far as their job is concerned in terms of keeping up with stuff. So you have to be thinking about how to be part of the overall conversation. It's not just your story that's going out there and sitting there to be read. It's your story going out there to be commented on and picked up and shared with someone else, and another story working side by side that has a slightly different angle or a complementary piece of information to go with it. From a consumer standpoint, you want it all, right? There's no one source of information that can do it for you anymore, I don't think. Technical skills. I just hired a guy to be a video editor at Roll Call. He was an intern with us, and I don't think he thought of himself as a video editor, but he learned how to do it in college, and he was there, and we needed somebody, so I hired him. So, the more skills you can get in different ways, the more you can be there when the opportunities pop up, because you never know. I mean, when I started there a year ago, video was the farthest thing from my mind, but within 6 to 8 months, it became apparent that's one way people like to consume information, and we've got a perfect platform at Roll Call with all those speeches on the House and Senate floor and press conferences and Boehner and Reid and others, so people want to see it as well as read about it. And that gets to the reporter's job definition in the end, which is I think we have to be probably the most evolved creatures on earth right now, journalists, because you have to be ready to adapt to just about any circumstance that comes your way. You may think of yourself as an investigative reporter or a breaking news reporter or an enterprise explanatory journalist, which is fine. We all have things we want to do ourselves and make us reward ourselves, but you're not going to always be able to fit what you want, into what people like me are hiring feel like we need at a particular moment in time. So the people who can be the most flexible and understand that you can do anything for a year or so, if it positions you in an organization you think is worthwhile or gives you a skill that will expand your opportunities going forward, then I would encourage it, because I think that's where, we were just talking today, the iPad was first introduced in 2010. Now tell me what is going to happen in 2016, right? 3 years from now. You can't. You just don't know what's going to come out. So you have to be ready for almost anything. So anyway, what do you think about that? Does that make you excited or depressed? We're in need of more sugar. What's your experience in your newsrooms? I see there's a good collection of people from both newspapers and.
I'll say my experience is pretty much.
Where you?
The Philadelphia Inquirer.
Okay.
Just as yours were, breaking news. Within 2 hours, 3 hours, you're already moving on to the next day, to a second day story, and that's what I think become a challenge, at least for us at our paper, where our web and print isn't necessarily always in sync.
Mm-hmm.
And if I cover something in the middle of the day on Tuesday and I write it as a breaking news story, do I do it as breaking news for the newspaper the next day because some of those people might not have read it?
Right.
Or do I do the second day story because all the people who read it online are now looking for the next step in the story? And that's I don't think we have a clear answer to that yet.
What kind of guidance do you get from your editors on that?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Yeah.
The editor I work for most directly right now is more of an old school kind of person and doesn't necessarily think of it in those ways. So a lot of times it just depends on which editor I've spoken to,
right.
and a lot of it just depends on the given story. But it's a challenge every time. But I used to do sports, and I would say within an hour to 2 hours of the game, people were done talking about the game and were ready to start talking about the next
game. Right? Yeah.
And, you think game day's like the big day, but within a couple hours of it, it was already.
It's the past, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I'm with Energy Wire, and of course we do a daily. In the AM we'll publish one edition, but a lot of the stories that we'll be working on the previous day, Bloomberg, Reuters, or some of the other business publications already picked up on them, and so we're sort of expected to, like you said, add a little analysis, make it something still worth reading by the time people get around to it. And for a lot of people, it will be the first time they see it, especially if it's a kind of a wonkier, more dealing with a particular area of interest or people like I have. But you still gotta sort of spice it up a little bit with those elements when you don't have a website that's updated constantly like a lot of places. So It's challenging.
Yeah.
To me, I think, you got to decide what's your value, right? I mean, if you're giving people information that they don't have, that's great. I mean,
Right.
you should do that as quickly
Mhm.
and efficiently as you can. But most of us cover things that 90% of the time they're going to have a dozen or 5 dozen choices of where to get that same information. So, the premium is to give it to them in a way that gives them value, whether it's beautifully written or something like that, or it makes sense of something that's complex that, maybe they need that help, I mean, there's a tension in that because if we
Yeah.
wait too long, people have moved on,
Exactly.
At
Yeah.
the same time, if you're always trying to be first, they'll read you and think, oh, guys, thanks for telling me. Now I'm going to go read somebody I really care about, and I'll look for that smarts next time somewhere else.
Yeah, it's we get the feedback we get at CQ from our customers is more analysis. That just keep they because here's the thing, especially in Washington, where information is the currency of this town, but no one you cover, no matter how confident and cocksure they are, really knows what they're talking about.
Tweet that.
No, I mean, no one is sure of what they're talking about. Let me put it that way. It's not, they may know what they're talking about, but no one is absolutely sure. So they're constantly reading you and you and you and you to triangulate and make sure, okay, am I on solid ground here or not? That was one of the first things I learned covering the Farm Bill. It's all these people that thought they were sure about what was going on, and things weren't, that way. And so they needed that analysis. They needed my point of view, even though I wasn't the expert on agriculture policy by any means, but I talked to enough people, and that even now more so today when politicians don't talk to each other anymore. I mean, they used to do that. You become even more important as a bellwether of what's really going on.
So I just want to pick your brain about, I know we're moving towards digital media, digital journalism, being a multitasker. One person needs to do the job of like 6 people and everything like that. But I'm just wondering, we've seen it a lot recently with like the healthcare SCOTUS ruling and then the Boston bombing. It's like there's that sense of immediacy and competition that you have to sacrifice the accuracy. So what are your thoughts?
Well, this Matt Winkler at Bloomberg. Who's here from Bloomberg? I saw somebody. You've heard about Matt Winkler? He's the crazy editor of Bloomberg. I'm not on. So microphones here, right? So, but he has one thing that's very interesting because he's the one who emphasized when Bloomberg News was first created, they had to go out and beat everyone. I mean, they measure seconds, how many seconds they are out in front of Reuters or Dow Jones or any of the other competitors. But he has this line that says, if you're first and you're wrong, then you're not first. I mean, accuracy is everything in that regard. So it's hard. The temptation, I know myself. It's basically if you're dealing in split second timing, trying to get something up, temptation is just to get it out there and fix it later. But can't do that.
I think yesterday in Dallas, Texas, which is where my newspaper is, there was a big snowstorm. Ice storm for 4 days. The transit had been out. I mean, people were locked in their homes, all that crazy stuff. And it raised the question of like, what's the best thing a newspaper can do during a sort of community crisis of sorts? So like a tornado had killed people, but it was a
Right.
pretty severe winter storm for Texas. And we wanted to do everything. We wanted to have 100, 300, photos that staff had put up, along with the professionals, and thousands of user-generated content. People wanted to know listings, which grocery stores had
Right.
bananas and which
Right.
didn't. There's like the big picture store. Why did the dark transit system not invest in these things? Why, mismanage, and all the big sort of questions all swirling around. And it does. I don't think we have any clear answers, but it raises on a very sort of mundane level, like what is a site for? So what's the best? I mean, is it an avalanche of quick hit stories so that people could have a sense of exactly what's happening right now? Or is it, some guidance and analysis that really helps them make sense of the world that they're living in right now? And how do you do both? Can you do both? How do you balance it?
It's all those things, right? Yeah, I mean, for a newspaper, I used to work for newspapers. You're writing for a general audience, people who aren't paying close attention to the things you're paying attention to. For the most part, that's why they come to you. But in a crisis situation like that, or basically, they need the newspaper to live their lives, to get buy food and clothing and get around and buy gas and things like that. So it's pretty basic, fundamental, help me live my life type thing. It's CQ or some of these other specialty publications, trade publications. People need you to do their jobs, right? That's what they're looking at. That's what they're not there just to read idle time. They're basically got something to do, and they want to read anything they pick up from you and they're paying for. Has to have some action. Again, Matt Winkler used to call it in Bloomberg, the best story on the Bloomberg terminal is one that moves the market, because it helps someone either buy or sell. Well, in Washington, the best stories in CQ and other papers is something that tells someone, okay, I know what I have to do next based on this. I have to go talk to this person. I have to go write an amendment to a bill that get my language in there. I have to spend some money on some politician that's not behaving properly. So
I wonder, though, if that's not exactly what newspapers are supposed to be doing. What am I supposed to? What school should I send my kid to? Where should I shop? Who should I trust in terms of public officials?
yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not so sure it's so different.
Well, the only difference is in the business to business world or the trade pub world, you're dealing with people who probably know more than you do about the topic you're writing about. Whereas in the general circulation newspaper world, you know a lot more than your readers do in general, because they're doing their own jobs. They're not paying attention to things that you're paying attention to closely. But I agree with you. It's the same thing that's going on, which is help me live my life or help me do my job, right? So.
Hi.
Emily, yes.
So going back to everyone having to be first for everything, and then you do get a scoop, and then 500 papers come and report on what you reported, and either sometimes will say that you reported it first, or most of the time won't.
Right.
So, as an editor, what do you think your role is, and is that a problem? How do you fix that?
You still get credit for me. Yeah, I don't know. This is, who's here from Energy Wire? Yeah. I mean, anybody, CQ, we used to have this problem all the time when I was starting at the Week Report, again, because we'd be writing about a bill at the subcommittee level and writing a story, and then everyone swoops in when the bill comes on the House floor and writes, basically cribs from my previous stories to write their story. It's part of the problem of working for specialty publication, right? Yeah. It kind of comes with the territory. Now, on the other hand, if you get some chronic abusers, then it's my job as the editor to call them up and say, what's going on here, right? I mean, because we would do this. I mean, there's a code of honor there, right? Basically, we would do the same thing if they scooped us. We'd want to attribute that to them. So, but it's hard because there's just so many people out there now, and it's hard to keep track of it.
I feel like, I say this sometimes, some reporters are getting crazy, but I feel like scoops are valuable but often overrated, in that a lot of it is stuff that's coming out anyway.
Right.
Within an hour or two. I mean, so many scoops. Unless it's a scoop that's like, this is something people wanted hidden, and this reporter came up with it, and then nobody would have never come to light otherwise. So many scoops are, tomorrow or in 2 hours, John Boehner has an announcement. Well, all right, you give me 2 hours of news, and it's not even that substantive.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm kind of the same way. I'm an old school guy. I could wait till tomorrow morning, read that in the paper. In some cases.
I think that's right. Like, I'd be upset if I waited that long, but
yeah.
If it's 5 minutes, if it's something that's on my beat, I'm concerned about it. But I feel like people put so much on it, and it's not always adding that much value to what people know. It's more adding people's egos.
What do other people think about that? Any opinions?
I'd like to agree with you, but I think, let's say you're a huge basketball fan, and the Philadelphia Daily News has the coaches resigning 20 minutes before you're going to read the other guy, And then, so how do you come back and like make it okay? I guess you write a whole lot better second.
I mean, 20 minutes though, how many people are, how many people are?
I've
Right,
seen worse
exactly.
than that though, where people will like you will get a real story and you will
That's what
report
I'm
it,
saying.
and then someone will come in and like verify it on their own, and then report it as if you never reported it first. And like they never would have made the call had you not written the story, and then they seem to think that it's like fine that they just wrote the story you wrote and it was your idea,
Right. I'm not saying that like you should just steal other people's work. I'm just saying that I think sometimes there's just too much emphasis on like, well, Politico had it 10 minutes before roll call did. Well, you know what? Unless I was on Politico the minute it broke, I don't have any more information. And again, sometimes I just feel like it's stuff that would have come out anyway. And if they didn't give it to Politico, they would have given it to roll call. It's not like it was unearthed. And they make it up.
Well, I think you're you're not really talking about the same thing. You're talking about the emphasis put on scoops in general, and you're talking about so what happens when you get one, and basically you get co-opted, right?
Right.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Or like when someone just rewrites the story that you wrote that was original reporting,
Right.
and comes in and is like, you write the story about some race that's getting big, and then, someone else comes in and it's as if you never wrote anything about it.
Yeah, but I think over time, frankly, your readers, if you're doing what your readers expect of you, and giving them those things, they're not keeping score of that stuff. I don't think, but they do appreciate the effort put into it to get them something early and fast, right? I think over time, I think we've discovered that at Roll Call over this past year. We're building an audience that's now getting more and more loyal, even though there are all these other choices out there, because we're thinking of our particular audience. In Roll Call's case, it's congressional staff. I mean, we just really hone in on staff and make it clear that the whole publication, not just as well as each story, is really designed for them. And we're getting feedback now that they see that. They appreciate that. Linda.
I'd like to raise a point, because to me, one of the biggest differences now from when I started in the business, which was back a little bit after you started in the business, but not much, is the interaction that we're able to have with readers. For an afternoon paper on the business desk, I heard from a couple of sources, a couple of people who would write letters to the editor, a gadfly or two, and that was pretty much all the interaction I ever had with people who were reading my stories. But now you put a story out there and you could have 15 or 20 people, or many more, commenting immediately. So my question is, does that help you? And does it influence either the next story you do, or what's the impact of comments?
Energy wire doesn't have.
Based on what other people say, why not? And would it be helpful?
Yeah. Like when I was working for the AP, everybody would, especially covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, everybody would comment and appear on all sorts of blogs. Any little bit that I wrote would be nitpicked and looked around. So it does definitely affect, the level of, I would say, caution that you put into your stories when you know that people are going to tear it apart. It's one thing when you're writing for an industry audience that's more comfortable with the kind of language that you'll be using and with the kind of issues that you're dealing with. Whereas if you're, going to get lambasted from the general public if you make one tiny misstep, it's certainly a different reporting.
On that issue, it doesn't even have to be a misstep.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there is no,
It could be something,
I think it can also be really helpful though, because it's not comments things like social media and things like that.
Yeah.
Whether it's getting more sources or something. There are people who know more about what you're writing about than you do, and they can tell you something. I just happened today with a story that I was this morning. I've been meeting with someone about something I wrote. Like more information that you didn't know, sources that you didn't know to contact. Another example that you weren't aware of. I mean,
so useful.
So you're getting information back.
What's that?
You're getting information back, essentially.
Right. It
Yeah.
helps in the reporting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge is you have to sift through the vast majority of comments which are not
especially in politics, not useful or not productive. It's just a political dialogue
Yeah.
between ideological enemies, it seems like.
Right.
And you have to go through those, and it takes time. I mean, yeah, you can certainly find, and I find that, you know, sometimes I get, having my email on there is a blessing and a curse too, because people will email you, or, you know, or call you, and that's, the useful information, which is great, but then you just, I get the same.
Sometimes you're just getting a screed.
Yeah, and then, yeah.
Send someone through it.
So it's,
It's hard in the political world. I worked for Federal Computer Week, and we had comments on our site there. And the audience is government IT professionals, CIOs and CTOs and other people. And Federal Computer Week is a policy magazine. It was about government policy toward IT contracting. And we had a really intelligent threads of conversations in our comments. You know, these people, they finally had someone to speak to. It was like, and every once in a while we'd actually write back and say, could you turn this into an op-ed? You know, it was that good and that interesting. But it takes that kind of. But once you get into politics, like roll call, boy, it's the same thing. It's just nothing but the wackos going one side or the other.
I've seen that in other comments on stories when I'm just reading stories that pertain to my beat, and sometimes you'll see a comment from somebody, like I cover a lot of crude by rail, and you're like, this person had to have been a former rail official. The way they're writing this up, they know all the regulations. You can go back and then I can find that stuff, and it's really useful. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, this person clearly knew what they were talking about. And obviously, you know, you got to take everything with a grain of salt and never just like, you know, report something that's, you know, somebody with a clear agenda and stuff is going to post comments on these websites, but like. It certainly could be a rich source for material, and just, you know, and it's pretty easy to distinguish between somebody who's in the know and somebody who's just generally commenting, being like,
Right. So what is the kind of the equivalent of that in a general newspaper audience would be, you know, hobbyists and other people who have special interests. If there's something that's particular geographical that's connected to your newspaper, but is kind of a community that right now may not have a voice or a platform to talk to each other with. That's where, you know, a newspaper could be really just a simple blog could be kind of the galvanizing force. Yes.
Just wanted to get your perspective on online corrections. And I know different outlets handle this differently, and our organization is trying to figure this out too. But with web stories constantly being updated and elaborated on, do you think it's necessary that you note when there is a major change, or do you feel like that's something that's more organic, that just updates naturally with the story?
I think the problem with that is you don't know when your readers have read the story. And so they may be under a misapprehension of something, you know, a certain number of them may be. So that's why I do think there's an argument for, especially, you know, major corrections. I don't want someone going around quoting me incorrectly if I've made a mistake, and they're going out and repurposing it and sending it all over the place. So that's where I would, if it's something that's really factually wrong, it should be noted that something's been changed. But I do think that there's a lot of situations now where you wouldn't spend the time. All you're doing is updating the story or refining it or clarifying it, things like that. I'm not sure. It's again, what information does the reader need? That's why I just keep asking. What does the reader need here in this situation, so that they're clear about what we're writing about?
Can I ask a technical question? If I post a link story in a newspaper and the newspaper later updates that story, does my link take my readers to the updated version?
Should, yeah.
It should.
Unless they've literally created a new story, which the old link is no longer operative. Sometimes that happens. If the story's changed a lot, you know, we might create a whole new slug
But then
for
you
the story.
kill the old one so that it would
Yeah.
just be a broken link. It
Right.
wouldn't take you to the old version.
Exactly. Yeah.
It would redirect you to the new one.
Say it again?
You could also redirect that
Right.
old one so that
To the
when
new
people
one.
search for it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Curious to get your thoughts. It seems like there's a disconnect. Sometimes, you know, our first presenter talked about our attention span is going down and down, and you have to really try harder to keep people and yet you say that your readers tell you they want analysis. And, you know, I can't, there's so many times when I've written, you know, what I thought was a decent analysis piece, and it doesn't get any readers.
Yeah.
It gets very few readers, and then you write something that's, you know, more sensational, doesn't have any real content to it, and it gets tons of readers.
Right.
So, like, how does, even like, you know, the fascination now, it seems like in Washington is lists top 5 reasons to,
Listables.
Yeah, yeah.
and, like, that's, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're just, I just feel like they're trying to get a click.
Yeah.
What's your,
They are. That's all they're trying to do is get you to click. I do it too.
how do you, kind of, how do you,
So, the thing about there's two thoughts that come there. Number one, we've got to acknowledge that readers are pressed for time, and they've got a lot of demands on their time. So to get them to read anything more than 500 words is asking a lot. It's just asking a lot of anybody to read. Think of yourself. How often do you have time to read something that's 500 words or longer? It's going to take 5 to 10 minutes out of your day to sit down and read. So it's got to be pretty good, and it can't waste any time. You can't be a lot of throat clearing at the top. You know, you basically got to get to the nut graph fast and make your point, and then argue it. But that's basic, right? That's nothing that's changed since what is Mark Twain said, you know, when he filed his travel pieces, and his editor says, a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, and he said, I didn't have time to write it short. It takes work. The other thing, though, is because of the nature of digital now, and this is something I'm really interested in, we're going to look at it at CQ, is how often do you read a story in the Post where you literally skip over 5 or 6 graphs of background? Because you've got the background, you know it, and basically they put a new top on a story and then basically reiterated everything you've already known before. I mean, that's, to me, if we could come up with a way, and I think you can digitally, to do what's called structured content, where if someone wants the background, you click here and you go off of that, but you're just basically putting 3 or 4 graphs of new information, new analysis on top of something that's an incremental development or something that people are used to. And the digital world allows us to do that, and we got to come up with ways. We're still kind of thinking, again, like the old newspaper format, which is, here's the news, and here's this background, and here's some more quotes, and blah, blah, blah. It's just readers don't have time for a lot of that anymore. So I think that's where we have to start thinking more creatively about how to use the platform to kind of meet a need or a changing consumption habit.
Same vein, it's been interesting to see how the media has evolved from kind of a one-way voice of God,
Right.
distribution, to now it's more of a conversation, and in that vein, kind of it seems like we're kind of on the cusp of more personalization. Like, have you used Circa at all?
No.
It's interesting because you can personalize it because you can sort of log in and it knows what you know, and then it will only update you when there's a new.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. No, that's the kind of stuff I'm just fascinated by that. Those kind of tools now that are being created because they are time savers ultimately, right? And that's what you need. And in a multitasking world, what do you need? You really need time so you don't have to do so many tasks at once. You can just limit some of them.
Along those lines, there's a woman in San Francisco who's from Paris who's created a prototype called the News Concierge. And the idea, once it gets working, she would come to a page like the New York Times, and because you logged in, it would know not just that you've already read, 6 of the front page stories, and it's not going to show them to you anymore, but it would also know that you're really smart about foreign affairs and you want everything about that. But
Yeah.
for the Treasury announcement, you may know nothing, and you need a very simple kind of, it's really interesting to see how that works. There's certainly, they certainly have the information on you to do that. Just make it work.
So chooses what article do you see?
Yeah, so first, I go to the New York Times in the morning, I click on 4 or 5 articles. When I come back, unless those have been significantly updated, they won't even show up. So there's new stories there. And then over 6 months of me playing with it, it knows the kind of stories I know a lot about. And don't know anything about. So.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I guess
guess I'm just wondering what's a good digital model to impose, because my company, I work for Air Force Times, we're a weekly publication,
Mhm.
so we're kind of having that disconnect of how do we stay loyal to our print readers when we're a weekly publication, when we're also doing digital first. We're putting all those stories immediately on the
Mhm.
web, but we have to remodel them in a way that it's going to go in the paper and the readers get a fresh new scope of what's in the story. I guess I just wanted to get your opinion.
Well, I tried this at Federal Computer Week, because we did the same thing there. And I sort of used the magazine. It's a magazine, a weekly magazine, which really became bi-weekly. The idea that you got all this information flying at you all day long, like basically, and all incremental developments. You're trying to keep up, and at some point, you just want to call time out and say, what does it all add up to? What's stuck on the wall and what fell off? And that's where a print publication could have a role, right? If you basically it's just the place to stop. Maybe it's a Saturday morning, or some place where you can just basically shut everything else and read this. And I like magazines that can kind of do that. The Week magazine, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's pure aggregation, but that's essentially what it is. When I got out of following Washington news for a couple of years, and that I started subscribing to that just to sort of catch me up on what's going on in Washington once a week. It's kind of like Time Magazine used to be in the old days.
Being in Washington, I've been here for a little more than a year, and you realize like there are some stories that are really intense for like a few hours, and then by
Right.
Friday you're like, why did I even
Care, right? Yeah,
It
yeah.
means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I'm writing my weekend story, and that thing on Thursday means absolutely nothing.
And that's I think a newspaper can serve a role there, and just sort of telling people what mattered and what didn't in the end. So especially something like Air Force Times could do that.
I also had just like a thought to contribute to, you write something for the web and how much do you change it for the paper, or how much do you focus on analysis.
Uh-huh.
But someone told me, you just think of them as two different audiences and assume that most of the people who are going to your website to read it aren't going to read it in the paper as well. So they're not going to even look for that analysis. They're going to look for everything you can give them in one
Yeah.
space. And then for the print reader, you write it in a way that they expect
Right.
to read it. So
The difference is you can measure that on the web, right? You've got the metrics, so you can tell what's working and what's not working. I do that every morning now at our news meeting. We put the previous day's metrics up, see which stories worked and which didn't. You can't do that with your paper audience as well. You can get some feedback, but that's not a bad assumption going in. And see how it works. I at roll call, I think it's true. Like I said, I think it's staff who reads the website and it's members who read the paper, and the advertisers who still are in the paper. I get these. My opinion editor was on maternity leave for a couple of months, so I was fielding op-eds submissions, which we get a bunch of at roll call, and how many of those people wanted it to be in the paper? I could not believe. I said, I only got room for 2 a day in the paper. I can put 10 up online. But there are those like that. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, going on that same theme, I'm just curious how. So one thing I like about what the Times does is every story online says a version of this appeared on page
Mhm.
one of the
Mhm.
paper. And I personally love that
Mhm.
because it makes me think that okay, what I'm looking at is different, which is good because I came on the web to look at it for the reason rather than
Yeah.
going to the paper. So I haven't managed to convince the Post to do that, but I really
It would
wish
be
they
helpful.
would.
You like that?
Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
like that too, because I feel like sometimes, I think on the Post, like this has happened to us, where it's like we're trying to figure out, okay, this is an op-ed, and we know that it's running on Sunday, but it was published online on Friday or Saturday, and so we're trying to be accurate in how we're like citing it on the program, and it's just not as clear on the Post. I know that happened with like Ben Crump, the Trayvon Martin family lawyer. It was just kind of like slightly confusing. We actually had to just like call and just like make sure, like, what day did this actually run in the paper? And that just like was like an extra step of just,
Mhm.
that if it had been more clear on the
That's
website, it would
another
have.
thing that
Yeah.
we haven't. So we publish most of our Sunday content on Fridays.
Yeah.
And the Times and other publications even publish some of it on Thursday, just because by Friday people have like given up on the internet and want
Yeah.
to go home.
But I'm sure like the New York Times Magazine, they publish stuff on Wednesday, I think,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
their big
It's just for
features,
traffic.
yeah, yeah.
Like, you know, you
Yeah.
reach more people, but I'm just curious what, I don't know, your organizations do in terms of web versus print, because it really is, I don't know if anyone's figured out the perfect formula.
No one has, and there's no digital publishing for dummies book out there. You know, when I started at Roll Call, that's what I told everybody. I had no idea how to do this, but we're just going to try everything, right? But I think the key, what you're talking about, it seems to me, is just keep the reader front and center. What does the reader need, you know? And if you're thinking that way, even if you don't have the hard evidence to know, at least your starting point is the right place. It's not what I think you need to know. It's what do you need to know, and how do I get that? And sometimes it's a little piece of information like that. What's the provenance of this article, right? Yeah. Yes.
You talked about examining the metrics every morning. Can you talk about how you use those numbers to determine what your reporters do and how they do it?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not just a numbers game. I mean, I'm not. I mean, we love a lot of hits. As everybody, and I tell reporters when when the stories have gone viral or something, they love that. But what it tells me is that there's a hunger for a certain kind of information, and what else could we do to satisfy that hunger? You know, maybe it's a list. Maybe it's a list that comes behind a story that everyone likes, or maybe it's a second day story, or maybe it's an op-ed that we should go solicit. I don't know, but it's just I don't think I don't want to sort of become a pure ratings game like network television does and things like that. Then you're just going to end up putting out junk, you know, because you know that is the most popular. But your readers ultimately will appreciate any effort you do to essentially pay attention to their interests, and keep feeding it with more analysis, more complex stuff. It's not just candy. That's how we use it, you know. So there's sometimes I go, well, the story got 10,000 hits. That's great, you know, fantastic. But here this story got 1,000. I didn't think it was going to get any. So what's going on there? And in our case at Roll Call, a lot of times it's a more staff-oriented story. You know, it's something that goes right to the heart of our readership, even though our readership is not only congressional staff. There's not that many of them. We go to the whole country. But if we're resonating there, then I know we're doing the right thing.
I mean, does a lack of interest in media, enterprise stories, does that dictate that, you know, maybe our audience doesn't want as much of this on a particular topic, or do you feel a need, are you compelled to write certain types of stories because you are a news organization? I think the latter. I think there's a certain responsibility we've got. You can't always spend a lot of time doing it, but there is, and I think that's an expectation of readers. I mean, there's a lot of stories I love seeing in the Post, investigative stories I won't read, but I'm sure glad they did them. You know, I feel like they're looking out for me.
I can't tell you they're interested in it until you uncover something, right? Like,
Right, exactly.
You don't know
Yeah.
what's going on.
Yeah.
And being a regional reporter, we kind of get the feeling that sometimes if you do an enterprise piece that isn't salacious at all and it doesn't draw enough comments or enough Facebook shares, it's like, why do they even spend time doing
Yeah.
that? But
if it goes to the heart of your mission, then I think your readers will acknowledge that and recognize it and do it. But that's if it strays from your mission, then you got a problem, you know. Then you're confusing readers. Why are they doing that, right? But if it goes to the heart of the mission of your publication, then I think it's part of the responsibility. Yeah. Yes.
This might be out of your purview, but earlier, our first speaker was talking about how there's a high demand for video, especially on the web.
Mhm.
Everything is trending towards the web, and again, immediacy, everybody wants everything on the web. Newspapers are struggling, but TV stations are also struggling.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you guys actually watch the news now?
Right.
So I guess, where do you see the future of TV news?
gosh. I stopped watching it years ago. The 6 o'clock news on both the local and national. I personally, I just. But then they don't do that much news anymore either. They're doing, good diets and really fluff stuff. But I think it's very clear from the history of the 20th century that the human mind loves moving pictures and will go out of their way to look at them, whether it's movies, television, video. So now just the fact that we moved to a new platform, the web, doesn't change that human instinct to want to see it in pictures. We're a visual society. Then it just becomes a question of how do you do it in a smart way. In the web, it's got to be shorter. It's got to be 2 minutes or less for the most part, right? But we did a piece of McCall, right, the second richest member of Congress, got up on the floor of the House yesterday and started complaining about the fact that he'd lost his health benefits and how much more expensive it was going to be for him. We just did a little clip of that, put it up, and HuffPo picked it up, and it's gotten thousands and thousands of hits. I mean, that was a 1-minute speech, priceless. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something like he's worth at least $117 million or something.
Right.
I feel like the whole nature of the competition between different media types is changed. I mean, I remember when I worked first for an afternoon newspaper that competed with a morning paper. Then the afternoon paper went out, and so my morning paper was still competing against another morning paper in the market, and we were all competing against TV. And we used to lament in the newsroom, this TV is going to win this story because it's got great pictures. And we couldn't do, we could do a single photograph, but we couldn't do the video. And now, then it got flipped on its head because suddenly we could do video and put it up. And now there's so much convergence, I feel like there isn't even any competition. The newspapers are, how many of the regional papers are partnered with a local TV station? Just one?
Well, the Star Tribune just hired an anchor from a 6 p.m. anchor from one of the TV stations, and she does video reports throughout today. She'll Skype us, and there's a big push towards video there. So.
Yeah.
But your point is that that's not a distinguishing characteristic of print versus.
I think there's very little competition. I mean, I see between the regional newspapers, suddenly they've divided up the territory, they're sharing stories, they have joint distribution networks. I mean, it's like they're one paper practically. And then between the newspapers and the TV stations, they have these partnerships, so they just share things on the web. The newspaper video goes up on the TV station's website and vice versa. I don't know that that's a good thing or a bad thing for readers, for viewers.
I don't know that happens everywhere. I mean, I think there's a whole. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. Don't live there or work there anymore, but there's now a public radio station that has hired like 8 investigative reporters who have given the Courier-Journal a run for their money. WDRB TV is now hired like all the top sports columnists to write on their web. I mean, so it's really changing, and I think that there's more competition by like 100 times.
Wow, so maybe it depends on the market.
Well, it's happening in different battlefields, right? That's what it sounds like what you're saying. It's not just the classic, big TV versus big paper meeting at the front. There's all these little places, little skirmishes around here that you're competing on.
At the Morning News, a leading television site just hired a couple of our investigative people away to be producers. They're competing in print and video. Obviously, they got more video than we do, but not that much. New people like Texas Tribune and stuff. I mean, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I think we all just still have our distinguishing. I mean, we can compete with TV, with video, but nobody's gonna write that 3,000 word story except the newspaper, or a 7,000 word story is gonna be New Yorker or whatever. I mean, everybody has something.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you have to find your niche. That's the the byword today. Find your niche and just mine it. Yeah. Yes.
So you're more interested in specialists than generalists when it comes to hiring. Is that how I understand that?
Did I say that? No.
So, like, find your niche.
Well, yeah, but I think a generalist can find a niche. What I'm just saying is be adaptable, be willing to become. I mean, yeah, I'm the classic example. I got hired at CQ, because my wife moved down here, and they said, "Good news is you're hired. Bad news is you got the agriculture beat." I knew nothing about it, but I wrote a book about it 3 years later. Now I haven't covered it since, but for a short period of time there, I was one of the experts in this town on farm policy. I think if you can do that in Washington, that shows an editor that they can throw you anywhere, and you can get up to speed fast, and you can play in the major leagues at that level. But it comes a time in a journalism career where sometimes you have those crossroads moments where in my case, the agriculture reporter at the Post left and recommended me for the job, and I had moved on to the budget beat by that, and I'm going, I don't know, Ward, if I want to go back to agriculture. And he goes, yeah, it's the Post. If they offer you the job, you'll take it. At that time, I would have. And some people in this town really succeed, fantastically by becoming specialists. Rick Atkinson, look at what he's done. He was a former, reporter for the Post. Has written now 3 volumes on World War II, one of which won a Pulitzer Prize. I wouldn't tell him not to keep focusing on, military and defense issues. But that was his moment, his opportunity at that time. I think he recognized it. All I'm saying is, I think the opportunities, you cannot predict what the opportunities are going to be in the next 5 years. You can't predict them, so just be ready for anything that could come your way.
Well, on that note, do you have any kind of resources that you keep tabs on to kind of keep up the pace with what might be going on right now, and in terms of?
Yeah, I'm writing down Circa. I just heard about Circa. I keep my ears open for all this stuff because you got to. This video thing with McCall that I just found out about. There's a network, NDN, now that has most of your papers are probably part of the AEP, yeah, where
they syndicate all of them.
They syndicate the videos on. So if I produce a video, I can take anything down from their site I want and put it up there and sell ads against it. If I produce a video like we did in McCall, they'll take it and they'll distribute it around, and I get a cut of the ads they sell on that. So it's really kind of a new revenue opportunity for us that I never knew existed.
Yeah,
right?
When I was at the AP in the video unit, that was the big thing in terms of how revenue is earned there, because video, although it's a relatively new medium for the wire service, I think it's not even like 25 years old or something, but it's kind of leading the company in that it makes the most revenue compared to print because it can be resold in different territories. The same with photo, the same with radio, whereas print, once it's out there, it's just kind of like disappears in the ether, but that's kind of what's driving the revenue of at least like wire services that do offer. And because of just whatever relationships they have, actually I think really more overseas, they sell it to overseas broadcasters, like American News to, different folks.
And, web apps, not web apps, but mobile apps, there's kids all over town coming up with this stuff. It's incredible. And, some of them are going to be really worth, getting on our site or doing something with. So. It's hard to stay up with it, though. It's, there's going to be something like that you would never have predicted. Someone's figured out, and and that you could exploit for your purposes. One of the things, the fact is, that's one of the things we've said when we built CQ.com in 1999, and again and upgraded it in Com2, I think it was 2003. We had to build it all ourselves. It was a team of engineers and developers and other things that built this thing. Nowadays, if we were starting over from scratch, we'd buy everything off the shelf. And be applications and things like that would cost a trifle by comparison. And be up and running in a few months rather than a couple of years.
What are the best news apps that you guys use? Whether they're websites or some other news apps? Nothing?
What are the best?
Just the news organizations out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a good story for you. Gas Buddy. Anybody use Gas Buddy?
Yeah, I do.
So this is an example of how we've got to start thinking. I'll tell you a story. So I met the guy who owns Gas Buddy. He bought it. I think some kid developed it. But Gas Buddy is something on your device that basically tells you what the price of gasoline is in your immediate area, wherever you are, because he knows where you are, right? And you can, and if it doesn't have it, you can go there and you can punch in and you can be it's crowdsourced. So it's everybody gets. I met the guy who's got this. He says, yeah, it's good. We give it away free. You can go on the App Store, look up Gas Buddy and download it, put in anything. And he said, I sell a few ads against it, make a little money. I said, it's not bad. He says, that's not where I make my money. He says he makes his money by selling the information back to the energy companies because they don't have it. They don't know what the price of gas is on every corner of every, and they're willing to pay millions of dollars to have it.
And that blind spot's the energy industry.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what's really sad about that story is that when I was an editor at the Miami Herald, I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea to have a list of gas stations, and we would every week in the paper on a particular day, we'd put in the price of gas to allow consumers to compare the price at the different stations. And I think we had like the previous 2 weeks or something, so it was like 3 weeks at 15 stations. And I had to assign reporters and freelancers to be checking everybody had to check on the same day at their own. It's a pain in the ass to get that information and get it into the paper and make sure it was accurate. And then the gas stations that we targeted learned what we were doing, and they would change their freaking sign when they knew the reporters were coming. They would change it for one day and then
just to get in there. Ooh, it's like restaurant critics. You got to go in disguise, right?
So that app, that's really brought my whole dumb idea.
Crowdsourcing. Well, I mean, it's a great concept and the right applications.
But yeah, that app's like a really just fantastic example of really useful information.
Yeah.
And then
I use it all the time.
Yeah.
I use it all the time.
Right. Just saving a nickel there, right?
Well, I would love to see them take that and you'd be able to say how much you have in your tank right now, and where you're going, and what time the gas stations are going to be open, what the weather's going to be like.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whether you have enough gas to get to the cheap station.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of places that can go. All right, anything else before we wrap up? Comments, questions? Anything? All right, well, I'm going to thank David for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.